The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Republic, Washington Territory. As Fiona Prescott pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of Holloway's Mercantile, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst from her chest. Her trembling fingers brushed against the fresh bruise blossoming on her cheek, still tender from Victor's latest rage. 5 years of marriage had taught her the pattern. The drinking, the accusations, the fists. Tonight would be worse. She'd finally taken the cash from his hidden strongbox. She flinched at the sound of breaking glass from the saloon across the street, certain her husband's voice would rise above the usual evening ruckus any moment. "Madam, you all right there?" Fiona startled, a small gasp escaping her lips as she turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the fading daylight. As he stepped closer, she could make out his features. Kind eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn hat, a strong jaw softened by concern. He wasn't from Republic. She knew every face in this small mining town, had memorized which men to avoid when they'd been drinking. "How far do you need to go?" the stranger asked, his voice low and gentle, no hint of judgment in his tone. Fiona hesitated, clutching her small cloth bag tighter. Inside lay everything she owned that mattered. A photograph of her parents, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the $78 that might buy her freedom. The year was 1883, and a woman alone had few options in the West, fewer still when running from a husband with connections to the local mining company. I don't know," she whispered truthfully. "As far as this will take me." She gestured weakly to her bag. The stranger's eyes flickered to the bruise on her face, then back to her eyes. "Name's Isaac Donovan," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I've got a wagon headed to Seattle. It's not much, but you're welcome to it if you need passage." The saloon doors across the street burst open, and Victor Prescott's angry voice boomed down the street. "Where is she, that thieving wife of mine?" Fiona shrank back against the wall, terror washing over her face. "Decide quick, madam," Isaac said, extending his hand. "My wagon's just around the corner." She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the gathering crowd outside the saloon as Victor's rage grew louder. With a deep breath, Fiona Prescott made the decision that would change everything. "Seattle," she said firmly, placing her hand in his. "I need to go to Seattle." Isaac nodded once, and they slipped into the growing darkness behind the Mercantile, just as Victor's drunken shouts rounded the corner of the main street. The wagon rattled and swayed as Isaac guided his team of horses onto the rutted trail leading west out of Republic. Fiona sat rigid on the wooden bench seat, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge, listening for the sounds of pursuit. The night was crisp for early September, and she shivered in her thin calico dress. "He won't follow right away," Isaac said, breaking the tense silence. "They were pouring whiskey down his throat when I passed the saloon earlier. By morning, he'll be too sick to ride." "You don't know Victor," Fiona replied, her voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. "He doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." Isaac glanced at her and then shrugged out of his coat, draping it around her shoulders without slowing the horses. The sudden warmth and the faint scent of tobacco and pine enveloped her. It had been so long since anyone had shown her a simple kindness that tears pricked at her eyes. "I've got supplies in the back," Isaac said. "Food, water, some blankets. We'll make camp once we're far enough away. Unless you'd rather keep going through the night." Fiona looked behind them at the distant glow of Republic, growing smaller with each passing minute. "How well do you know these roads in the dark?" "Well enough," he answered. "Made this trip more times than I can count, hauling supplies between the mining towns and Seattle. Sometimes timber, sometimes ore. This time it's mostly dry goods and mail." "And fugitive wives, apparently," Fiona added with a bitter smile. Isaac's expression remained neutral. I don't make judgments about folks needing a fresh start. West is full of people running from something. They continued in silence as the stars appeared overhead, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. After an hour, Isaac guided the team off the main trail and into a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. We'll rest here, he said. Less chance of being spotted from the road. Fiona watched as he efficiently went about making camp, unhitching the horses and setting them to graze on a long lead, then building a small, nearly smokeless fire. His movements were practiced and economical, speaking of years spent on the road. She wondered what his story was, what had shaped this man who would risk helping a stranger. "You hungry?" he asked, offering her a plate of beans and salt pork he'd warmed over the fire. She nodded gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since morning. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the crackling flames between them casting dancing shadows across their faces. "Why are you helping me?" Fiona finally asked, setting aside her empty plate. "You don't know me. I could be the criminal my husband says I am." Isaac studied her for a long moment. "Are you a criminal?" Fiona touched the bruise on her face unconsciously. "I took money from his lockbox, money I earned washing clothes and mending for the miners that he took every week. So yes, perhaps I am." "That's not how I see it," Isaac replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup and passing it to her. "I've known men like your husband, men who think owning a woman means they can do whatever they please. I don't hold with that. And if he comes after me, after us—" Isaac's hand moved briefly to the revolver at his hip. "Then we'll deal with that when it comes. For now, you should rest. Morning arrives early out here." Fiona settled onto the bedroll he'd prepared for her, wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. Despite her fears, exhaustion quickly pulled her toward sleep. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Isaac, silhouetted against the stars, keeping watch over their small camp. She dreamed of Victor, his face contorted with rage, his hands reaching for her throat. She woke with a gasp just before dawn, cold sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill in the air. "Bad dreams?" Isaac asked quietly from where he sat against a tree trunk, his hat tilted low over his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, avoiding his question. "Enough," he replied, rising to his feet and stretching. "We should get moving. Still a long way to Seattle." As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, Isaac hitched the horses while Fiona quickly packed their meager camp. Within minutes, they were back on the trail, the wagon swaying beneath them as the horses found their rhythm. "You never said what's in Seattle for you," Isaac commented as the sun climbed higher. Fiona gazed at the dense forest surrounding them. "I have a cousin there. At least, I hope she's still there. We exchanged letters until Victor started intercepting my mail. She works as a seamstress in one of the new department stores. And if she's not there, then I'll find work somewhere. I'm good with a needle and I can cook and clean better than most." She straightened her shoulders. "I won't go back, not ever." Isaac nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Seattle's growing fast, plenty of opportunities for someone willing to work hard." "What about you?" Fiona asked. "Is Seattle home?" A shadow passed across Isaac's face. "Don't have much of a home these days. The road suits me fine." Before Fiona could inquire further, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable whine of a bullet passing overhead. Isaac reacted instantly, grabbing Fiona and pulling her down below the wagon's wooden sideboards as he shouted at the horses, urging them to greater speed. "Get down and stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver as another shot splintered the wooden seat where they'd been sitting moments before. "Victor," Fiona whispered, terror flooding her veins with ice. The wagon careened around a bend in the trail, wheels lifting dangerously on the rough terrain before slamming back down. Behind them, Fiona could hear hoofbeats gaining ground. "Hold these," Isaac said grimly, thrusting the reins into her hands. "Keep them running straight as you can." Before she could protest, he had swung himself into the back of the wagon, taking cover behind a crate of supplies. The next shot came closer, and Fiona heard Isaac's revolver answer with two quick reports. The pursuing hoofbeats faltered, then resumed, more cautious now. "Is it him?" Isaac called over the thunder of wheels and hooves. Fiona risked a glance back. "Yes," she confirmed, recognizing the broad shoulders and distinctive hat of her husband even at a distance. "And he's not alone. There's another rider with him." Isaac muttered something under his breath that Fiona couldn't hear. "There's a river crossing about 2 miles ahead," he said. "If we can make it there, we might lose them." Fiona gripped the reins tighter, determination hardening her resolve. She would not let Victor drag her back to that life of fear and pain, not when freedom was so tantalizingly close. The horses, sensing her urgency, strained against their harnesses, powerful muscles bunching as they pulled the wagon at a dangerous pace down the forest trail. Another shot rang out and Isaac grunted in pain. Fiona's heart lurched. "Isaac, keep driving," he gritted out. "Just a graze." The trail narrowed as it began to descend toward the river valley, making it harder for their pursuers to ride alongside. Fiona could hear the rushing water now, growing louder as they approached. "River's running high with the spring melt," Isaac warned, making his way back to the front of the wagon, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. "Crossing will be tricky. When we reach it, don't slow down. The horses know what to do." Fiona nodded, her mouth too dry for words. The forest thinned, revealing a wide, swift-flowing river ahead. The crossing point was marked by wooden posts on either bank, but the water churned brown and angry between them, well above its normal level. "Now," Isaac shouted as they broke from the tree line. Fiona slapped the reins against the horses' backs, urging them forward even as her mind screamed that this was madness. The team plunged into the swollen river, water immediately surging around their legs and against the wagon bed. The current caught them, pushing them downstream of the marked crossing. "Keep them straight," Isaac called, bracing himself against the wagon seat as water sloshed over the sides. Behind them, Victor and his companion had reached the riverbank but hesitated at the dangerous crossing. Fiona heard her husband's voice raised in a furious shout, but his words were lost in the roar of the river. The wagon lurched as the horses fought against the current, water now reaching the floorboards where their supplies were secured. For a terrifying moment, Fiona thought they would be swept away, but then she felt the wagon bed scrape against the riverbed as they found shallower water. With a final surge of effort, the horses dragged them up the far bank, water streaming from the wagon in sheets. "They're not following," Isaac observed, looking back across the churning river where Victor and his companion remained on the opposite shore. "At least not here. They'll look for another crossing." "How bad are you hurt?" Fiona asked, finally noticing the blood soaking his shirt sleeve. Isaac grimaced. "Nothing that won't heal. Bullet just grazed me." "We need to stop and tend it," she insisted. "Not yet. We need more distance first. There's a trading post about 5 miles ahead. We can rest there." As they drove away from the river, Fiona cast one last look back. Victor stood on the far bank, a distant figure now, watching them escape. Even at this distance, she could feel the weight of his hatred. She shuddered and turned away, focusing instead on the man beside her, whose strength and kindness had given her this chance at freedom. "Thank you," she said softly, "for risking your life for a stranger." Isaac's eyes met hers briefly, something unreadable in their depths. "You're not a stranger anymore, Fiona Prescott." The trading post appeared shortly before noon, a sturdy log structure surrounded by smaller outbuildings. A weathered sign proclaimed it Thompson's Trading Post and Way Station, and several horses were hitched to the rail out front, suggesting other travelers inside. Isaac guided the team to a water trough at the side of the building, well out of view from the main trail. "Wait here," he instructed. "I'll see if it's safe." Fiona watched anxiously as he disappeared inside, her gaze constantly returning to the trail behind them. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only minutes, Isaac emerged with an older man who wore a stained apron and had a shock of white hair. "This is Mr. Thompson," Isaac said. "He's agreed to let us rest here a while, says there's been no word of anyone looking for us yet." "Come in, madam," Thompson said kindly. "Got some stew on and a place you can wash up. My wife might have some clothes that'll fit you too." The interior of the trading post was surprisingly cozy, with a stone fireplace at one end and shelves of goods lining the walls. A few rough tables occupied the center where travelers could take meals. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes approached, introducing herself as Martha Thompson. "You poor dear," she said, noting Fiona's disheveled appearance and the fading bruise on her face. "Come with me. We'll get you settled." While Martha led Fiona to a back room with a wash basin and clean clothes, Isaac spoke quietly with Thompson, explaining their situation in low tones. By the time Fiona returned, wearing a borrowed dress and with her hair freshly combed, Isaac's wound had been cleaned and bandaged. "Mr. Thompson says there's a stagecoach due through here tomorrow morning," Isaac informed her. "Head straight to Seattle. Might be safer than the wagon from here." "What about you?" Fiona asked, alarm rising in her chest at the thought of continuing alone. "I'd still be heading that way with the wagon," he assured her. "Just thought you might make better time on the stage." "I'd rather stay with you," she replied without hesitation. "If you don't mind." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, surprise perhaps, or something warmer. "I don't mind." They ate Thompson's stew in comfortable silence, both grateful for hot food and a moment's respite. The trading post gradually filled with more travelers as the afternoon wore on, mostly miners and loggers stopping for supplies. Each new arrival made Fiona tense until Isaac placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Thompson will warn us if anyone suspicious shows up," he murmured. "Try to rest while you can." Despite her anxiety, exhaustion soon overtook her, and Fiona dozed in a chair by the fire. She woke to Isaac gently shaking her shoulder as twilight deepened outside the windows. "Time to go," he said softly. "Thompson says a couple of riders were asking questions at a farm up the road. Better move while we still have some light." Outside, their wagon had been restocked with supplies. The horses fed and rested. Martha pressed a bundle of food into Fiona's hands with a sympathetic smile. "There's a shortcut through Butler's Pass," Thompson told Isaac, pointing to a crude map he'd drawn. "Not as well traveled, might give you an edge." Isaac clasped the older man's hand gratefully. "We're in your debt." "Just get the lady to safety," Thompson replied. "That's payment enough." As they pulled away from the trading post, Fiona felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, yet for the first time in years, she was moving toward something rather than merely enduring. "Tell me about your life before Republic," Isaac said as they followed the narrow trail Thompson had recommended. "If you don't mind talking about it." Fiona watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I grew up in Portland. My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. He made sure I was educated, taught me to love books and music." How did you end up with a man like Victor Prescott? She sighed, the memories still painful despite the years. My parents died in a fever outbreak when I was 19. I had nowhere to go, no family nearby except my cousin in Seattle whom I'd never met. Victor was passing through Portland on business. He was charming then, or at least I thought so. He promised me a good life, security, a home of my own. By the time I discovered who he really was, we were already in Republic, hundreds of miles from anyone I knew. Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. Men like that are good at hiding their true nature until they have you trapped. What about you? Fiona asked, eager to shift attention from her painful past. Have you always been a wagon driver? A ghost of a smile touched Isaac's lips. No, not always. Grew up on a cattle ranch in eastern Oregon. Youngest of 4 brothers, left home at 17 to make my own way. Tried my hand at mining, ranching, even worked on the railroad for a spell. He adjusted his hat as the trail dipped lower into a valley. Found I liked the freedom of the road best. No boss except the weather and the terrain. No family waiting for you somewhere. Isaac's expression clouded briefly. Had a wife once, Caroline. Lost her and our baby boy to childbed fever 6 years ago. I'm sorry, Fiona said softly, understanding now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes. Was a different man after that, he continued, his voice distant. Couldn't bear to stay in the house we'd built together. So I took to the roads, carrying other people's goods from place to place. Been doing it ever since. They lapsed into comfortable silence as darkness fully enveloped them. The trail narrowed further, winding through dense forest that blocked the moonlight. Isaac lit a small lantern and hung it from the wagon frame, casting just enough light to see the path ahead. We'll need to stop soon, he said. Too dangerous to keep going in the dark on unfamiliar trails. Fiona nodded agreement, suddenly aware of how tired she was despite her brief rest at the trading post. Every muscle ached from tension and the constant jostling of the wagon. Yet beneath the discomfort was an undeniable thrill, the exhilaration of freedom, of taking control of her own fate after years of subjugation. They found a small clearing just off the trail, sheltered by a massive fallen cedar that would hide their campfire from the path. Isaac worked quickly to make camp while Fiona sorted through the provisions Martha Thompson had given them. Cold chicken and biscuits, she announced, unwrapping the package, and what looks like berry preserves. They ate by the small fire, the night sounds of the forest creating a peaceful backdrop to their meal. Fiona found herself studying Isaac's face in the flickering light, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the way his expression softened when he smiled. He was nothing like Victor, whose handsome features had always been marred by cruelty lurking just beneath the surface. What will you do in Seattle? Isaac asked, interrupting her thoughts. Beyond finding your cousin, I mean. Fiona wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter against the evening chill. Fine work, I suppose. Save enough to get my own place eventually. I've dreamed of opening a small bookshop someday, somewhere quiet where people could come to read and discuss ideas. Sounds nice, Isaac said, genuine warmth in his voice. Seattle's the kind of place where a dream like that might take root. What about you? She asked. Will you just keep driving the wagon routes? He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. It's what I know. Although lately I've been thinking it might be time for something else. Maybe stake a claim somewhere, build something again. What's stopping you? Isaac's eyes met hers across the fire. Never found a reason compelling enough, I guess. Until now, maybe. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, filled with possibility. Fiona felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear for once. Before she could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. and both froze. Isaac was on his feet in an instant, revolver in hand, positioning himself between Fiona and the potential threat. "Who's there?" he called, his voice hard. "Just a traveler," came a man's voice, followed by a figure emerging slowly into the firelight, hands raised to show he meant no harm. He was older, perhaps 50, with a graying beard and the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. "Name's Walker. Didn't mean to startle you folks." Isaac didn't lower his gun. "You're traveling mighty late and quietly too," Walker nodded, keeping his hands visible. "Been tracking a pair of men since yesterday. One's a big fella, mean-looking with a red bandana. Other's smaller, has a scar along his jaw. They robbed my trading post up near Colville, took all my cash and my best horse." Fiona and Isaac exchanged glances. The description matched Victor and whoever he'd brought along to hunt them. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Isaac said carefully, still not holstering his weapon. "What makes you think they came this way? Found their tracks heading south after they crossed the river." "Been following them since." Walker's sharp eyes took in the wagon, the supplies, and Fiona's anxious expression. "They looking for you too, by chance?" "What makes you say that?" Isaac's finger hovered near the trigger. Walker shrugged. "The big one was asking everyone at the last settlement if they'd seen a woman and a wagon driver, offering money for information." He studied Fiona more carefully. "Said the woman was his wife, run off with their savings." Fiona tensed, but Isaac's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "He's a liar," she said clearly. "And a violent one." Walker nodded slowly. "Figured as much. Man like that doesn't get those knuckles from honest work." He lowered his hands cautiously. "I've got no quarrel with you folks, just want what he stole from me." Isaac hesitated, then lowered his gun slightly. "How do we know you're telling the truth about the robbery?" "Don't rightly have proof," Walker admitted, "but I've got no reason to lie. Been running that trading post for 15 years without trouble until yesterday." Fiona touched Isaac's arm gently. "He could have ambushed us if he wanted to," she whispered. After a moment's consideration, Isaac nodded and holstered his weapon. "You're welcome to share our fire, Mr. Walker, but I'll be keeping watch." "Fair enough," Walker replied, settling himself at the edge of the firelight. "Where are you folks headed, if you don't mind my asking?" "Seattle," Fiona answered before Isaac could stop her. Something about the older man's straightforward manner inspired trust. "Long journey," Walker commented. "Especially with someone on your trail." "We'll manage," Isaac said tersely. Walker pulled out a pipe and began to fill it with tobacco. "Mind if I smoke?" Isaac gestured permission, and soon the sweet scent of tobacco joined the pine and wood smoke in the air. "Those men you're tracking," Fiona ventured after a while, "they'll be dangerous if cornered." Walker nodded, puffing his pipe thoughtfully. "Most men are, but I've dealt with worse in my time. Spent 10 years as a scout for the army before settling down with the trading post." He glanced at Isaac. "You handle that revolver like a man who knows its worth." "I get by," Isaac replied noncommittally. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional hoot of an owl in the surrounding forest. Despite her initial wariness, Fiona found herself relaxing in Walker's presence. There was something reassuring about the older man's calm demeanor. "You should get some rest," Isaac told Fiona eventually. "I'll take first watch, then wake Walker if he's willing." "Happy to do my part," Walker agreed. Fiona hesitated, still unsure about sleeping with a stranger in camp, but exhaustion soon won out. She curled up in her bedroll, the murmur of men's voices lulling her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was of Isaac's words by the fire, about finding a compelling reason to build something new. She wondered, with a strange flutter of hope, if she might somehow be part of that reason. She woke to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the trees and the smell of coffee brewing. Isaac and Walker were already up, speaking in low voices as they packed the camp. Isaac looked tired but alert, his eyes softening when he noticed she was awake. "Sleep well?" he asked, bringing her a cup of steaming coffee. "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "What's the plan?" "Walker knows these trails better than we do. Says there's a settlement about 20 miles ahead where we can resupply and get news." Isaac glanced at the older man. "He's offered to ride with us a while if you're comfortable with that," Fiona nodded. "I think we can trust him." They broke camp quickly, leaving minimal traces of their presence. Walker rode a sturdy mountain pony that looked like it could navigate the roughest terrain with ease. As they set out, he took the lead, guiding them onto an even narrower trail than they'd been following. "Old Trapper's Path," he explained. "Hardly anyone uses it these days. Your husband and his friend are likely sticking to the main route, thinking you'd do the same." "He's not her husband anymore," Isaac said firmly. "Not in any way that matters." Walker nodded in understanding. "World would be a better place if more men thought like you, Donovan." They traveled steadily through the morning, the trail gradually descending from the forested highlands toward broader valleys where settlements became more frequent. Fiona noticed Isaac watching her often, concern evident in his gaze whenever the wagon hit a particularly rough patch of trail. "I'm tougher than I look," she assured him after one such glance. 5 years with Victor taught me to endure." "You shouldn't have had to," he replied quietly. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest the horses and eat a quick meal. Walker scouted ahead while Isaac checked the wagon's wheels and axles for damage from the rough trail. "Walker seems to know exactly where we're going," Fiona observed, helping Isaac tighten a loose wheel nut. "Says he's traveled these parts for decades. Knows every trail and settlement between here and Puget Sound." Isaac wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm grateful for his help, but still keeping my guard up." "Do you think Victor is still following us?" Isaac's expression hardened. "Men like him don't give up easily, especially when their pride's been wounded." Walker returned before they could discuss it further, his expression grim. "Riders on the main trail," he reported. "2 of them moving fast. One matches your husband's description." "How far?" Isaac asked, instantly alert. "About 3 miles back, but they're gaining ground. Trail joins this one about 5 miles ahead." Isaac turned to Fiona, determination in his eyes. "We need to move. Now." They hastily packed up and within minutes were back on the trail, pushing the horses harder than before. The wagon bounced and swayed over the rough terrain, forcing Fiona to grip the seat tightly to avoid being thrown. "There's an old mining camp just ahead," Walker called back as he rode slightly ahead of them. "Abandoned years ago. Might be a good place to hole up until they pass." "Or a trap with no way out," Isaac muttered, but the decision was made for them as one of the wagon wheels hit a rock and cracked audibly. "We can't keep going like this," Fiona said as the wagon tilted dangerously to one side. "The wheel won't last." Isaac pulled the team to a halt, swearing under his breath as he examined the damage. "She's right. Wheel's splitting. Won't make another 5 miles. Mining camp it is then," Walker decided. "It's just over that ridge. If we're lucky, they'll pass by without noticing the turnoff." With no better options, they guided the limping wagon toward the abandoned camp, the damaged wheel groaning ominously with each rotation. The mining camp appeared as they crested a small rise, a collection of weathered wooden buildings clustered around what had once been a promising claim. Nature had begun to reclaim the site, with young pine trees pushing up between the structures and vines crawling over the remains of mining equipment. "Not much, but it'll provide cover," Walker said, dismounting to help Isaac with the team. We can hide the wagon in that old equipment shed." They worked quickly to conceal their presence, moving the wagon into a dilapidated structure that had once housed mining machinery. Isaac unhitched the horses and led them to a small corral at the back of the camp, where they wouldn't be visible from the main trail. "I'll keep watch from that ridge," Walker offered, grabbing his rifle from his saddle. "If they start heading this way, I'll fire a warning shot." As Walker disappeared into the trees, Isaac turned to Fiona. "Let's see if any of these buildings are still sound enough to provide shelter." They explored the abandoned camp cautiously, alert for rotting floorboards or collapsing roofs. Most of the structures were too far gone, but they found the former assayer's office still relatively intact, with 4 walls and a roof that leaked only minimally. "This will do," Isaac decided, clearing debris from the floor. "Has a back door too, in case we need to leave in a hurry." Fiona watched him work, struck by how naturally he took charge of their situation, how his first thought was always for her safety. In the short time she'd known him, Isaac Donovan had shown her more consideration than Victor had in 5 years of marriage. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "Not just for helping me escape, but for treating me like a person with value. It's been a long time since anyone did that." Isaac paused in his work, his eyes meeting hers with surprising intensity. "You don't need to thank me for that, Fiona. Any decent man would see your worth." "There aren't as many decent men in the world as you might think," she replied softly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings, until a distant sound hoofbeats on the trail below broke the spell. Isaac moved to the grimy window, peering cautiously through the dirt-streaked glass. "2 riders," he confirmed in a whisper, "coming up the main trail." Fiona joined him at the window, her heart pounding. Even at this distance, she recognized Victor's broad-shouldered silhouette and the distinctive way he sat a horse like he was always ready to dominate it into submission, just as he did with everything in his life. "They're stopping," Isaac murmured, tension evident in every line of his body. Below, Victor and his companion had halted their horses at the junction where the faint trail to the mining camp branched off from the main route. Victor was examining the ground, likely looking for wagon tracks or other signs of their passing. "Where's Walker?" Fiona whispered anxiously, scanning the ridge where he'd gone to keep watch. "I don't know," Isaac replied, his hand moving to his revolver. "Stay here. I'm going to get a better view." "No," Fiona grabbed his arm. "Don't leave me, please." The desperation in her voice made him pause. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, covering her hand with his own. "Together, then, but we stay low and quiet." They moved to a position where they could see without being seen, crouching beneath the window frame. Victor and his companion, a wiry man with a noticeable scar along his jaw, had dismounted and were examining the ground more carefully. Victor's face was set in the hard lines Fiona knew all too well, his anger visible even at this distance. "He looks like he could murder someone with his bare hands," Fiona whispered, involuntarily shrinking back from the window. "He'll have to go through me first," Isaac promised grimly. Victor appeared to be arguing with his companion, gesturing angrily toward the mining camp trail while the other man shook his head. After what seemed an eternity, they remounted their horses and continued along the main trail, though Victor cast one last suspicious glance toward the abandoned camp. Fiona exhaled shakily as the riders disappeared from view. "That was too close." "We're not safe yet," Isaac cautioned. "They could circle back if they don't find signs of us further ahead." A soft sound at the door made them both whirl around, Isaac drawing his revolver in one smooth motion. Walker stepped inside, raising his hands quickly at the sight of the weapon. "Easy now," he said. "Just me." Isaac lowered the gun slowly. "Where were you? We expected a warning if they approached." Had to stay hidden, Walker explained. That second man, the one with the scar, I know him. Jacob Reeves, bounty hunter and hired gun. Nasty piece of work. If he'd spotted me, he'd have known something was up for sure. A bounty hunter, Fiona echoed, fresh fear washing over her. Victor hired a bounty hunter to find me. Makes sense, Isaac said grimly. Man like that would have connections to such people. Walker nodded. Reeves doesn't come cheap either. Your husband must want you back pretty badly, madam. Not me, Fiona corrected, the truth suddenly clear. The money. He cares more about those $78 than he ever did about me. Well, whatever he's after, they're moving on for now, Walker said. But I agree with Donovan, we can't stay here long. That wheel needs fixing if we're going to continue. Isaac examined the damaged wagon wheel thoughtfully. There's enough wood in this camp to make repairs. Might not be pretty, but it should hold until we reach a proper settlement. I'll help, Walker offered. Used to do some wheelwright work in my younger days. As the men set to work repairing the wheel, Fiona explored the mining camp, gathering any supplies that might be useful for their journey. In what had once been the cookhouse, she found some preserved food that was still edible, jerky tough as leather and beans dried hard as pebbles, but sustenance nonetheless. More valuable was a small medical kit containing bandages and a bottle of laudanum, which she tucked carefully into her bag. The afternoon wore on, as Isaac and Walker labored over the wheel, stripping usable wood from the abandoned buildings and repurposing metal bands from old mining equipment. Fiona helped where she could, holding pieces in place or fetching tools, but mostly she kept watch, scanning the surrounding hills for any sign of Victor's return. As sunset approached, the wheel was finally repaired, crude but functional, reinforced with additional supports that Isaac had fashioned from salvaged lumber. It won't win any prizes for beauty, Walker said, standing back to admire their work, but it should get you to the next settlement at least. That's all we need, Isaac replied, clasping the older man's shoulder in gratitude. We owe you, Walker. The older man shook his head. Consider it payment for helping me track those thieves. Speaking of which, he picked up his rifle and checked its loading mechanism. I think it's time I continued on my own path. Those two are still out there with my money and my horse. You're leaving? Fiona asked, surprised at her own disappointment. Despite her initial wariness, she'd come to trust and even like the gruff older man. Walker nodded. Best for all of us, I think. I can move faster alone and your husband won't be looking for a single rider. He's not her, Isaac began. Not her husband anymore, Walker finished with a slight smile. I remember. He turned to Fiona, his weathered face softening. You've got a good man looking out for you now, madam, better than the last one by far. Fiona felt her cheeks warm at his implication but didn't contradict him. Instead, she impulsively hugged the surprised old scout. Thank you for your help, Mr. Walker. Just Walker, madam, and you're welcome. He tipped his hat to them both, then mounted his pony with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. Main Trail should be safe enough now. They were heading west last I saw. If you push on through the night, you might make Miller's Crossing by morning. Decent little settlement with a blacksmith who can properly fix that wheel. With a final nod, he turned his pony and rode away, soon disappearing into the gathering dusk. Fiona watched him go with a strange mixture of gratitude and trepidation. With Walker gone, it was just her and Isaac against Victor and his hired gun. We should get moving, Isaac said, interrupting her thoughts. Walker's right, traveling by night might be safer now. They hitched the horses to the wagon, loaded their meager supplies, and set out as the first stars appeared overhead. The repaired wheel held, though it made a distinctive rhythmic thump with each rotation that set Fiona's nerves on edge. Isaac guided the team carefully, keeping to a moderate pace to avoid further damage to the makeshift repair. The night was clear and cool, the trail illuminated by a three-quarter moon that cast everything in silver and shadow. After an hour of tense vigilance, they began to relax slightly, settling into the steady pace of night travel. Fiona found herself studying Isaac's profile in the moonlight, admiring the determined set of his jaw and the gentle way he handled the horses. "Tell me more about your dream," he said unexpectedly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "The bookshop in Seattle." Fiona smiled, surprised and touched that he remembered. "It's just a fancy, really. I've always loved books. My father had quite a collection. I used to imagine a small shop with comfortable chairs where people could sit and read, perhaps discuss ideas over tea, a place of learning and conversation." "Sounds like more than just a fancy to me," Isaac replied. "Sounds like a proper vision." "Victor thought it was foolish," she admitted. "Said books were a waste of time and money, especially for women." Isaac's hands tightened on the reins momentarily. "Victor Prescott has proven his judgment is worth less than dirt." His vehemence made her smile despite the gravity of their situation. "What about you? You mentioned staking a claim somewhere, building something. What would that look like?" Isaac was quiet for so long that Fiona wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "After Caroline died, I couldn't imagine being tied to one place again. The pain was too fresh, the memories too sharp. But lately—" he glanced at her briefly. "Lately, I've been thinking about a small spread somewhere with good water and timber. Enough land to run some cattle, maybe grow some crops. A place where a man could put down roots, raise a family." The wistfulness in his voice tugged at something deep inside Fiona. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. "It does, doesn't it?" he agreed, a note of surprise in his voice as if he'd only just realized the truth of it himself. They continued through the night, talking intermittently about their hopes and dreams, the conversation flowing easily between them despite the short time they'd known each other. Fiona found herself opening up about things she'd never told anyone: her childhood in Portland, her love of poetry and art, the crushing loneliness of her years with Victor in Republic. In turn, Isaac shared stories of his life on the roads, the interesting characters he'd met, the beautiful landscapes he'd traversed in all seasons. He spoke of his brothers back in Oregon whom he hadn't seen in years, of the cattle ranch where he'd grown up, of the brief happiness he'd found with Caroline before tragedy struck. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds, Miller's Crossing came into view in the valley below, a small but thriving settlement centered around a crossroads where several trading routes converged. Smoke rose from morning cook fires, and even from a distance, they could see people beginning their day's activities. "We made it," Fiona said with relief, realizing she'd been tensing for disaster through the night. "So we did," Isaac agreed, though his expression remained vigilant as he scanned the settlement below. "Let's find that blacksmith Walker mentioned and get this wheel properly repaired before we continue." They descended into the valley, the wagon's damaged wheel protesting more loudly with each mile. By the time they reached the outskirts of Miller's Crossing, several people had stopped to stare at the strangely patched vehicle and its weary occupants. The blacksmith shop was easy to find, marked by the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil and the acrid smell of coal smoke. The smith himself was a mountain of a man with massive forearms and a surprisingly gentle manner. "That's some interesting repair work," he commented, examining the makeshift wheel. "Hold together better than I would have expected, but you're lucky it didn't collapse entirely." "Can you fix it properly?" Isaac asked, already counting out coins from his pouch. The blacksmith nodded. Take about 4 hours. Have to remove the old one completely, reinforce the axle where it's worn. $15 should cover it. Isaac paid without hesitation, then turned to Fiona. Let's find something to eat while we wait. You must be starving. They found a small cafe opposite the blacksmith's, where the enticing smell of fresh bread and coffee drew them inside. The proprietress, a plump woman with a friendly smile, seemed delighted to have customers so early in the day. You two look like you've traveled hard, she observed, setting plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before them. Coming from or going to Seattle, Isaac replied cautiously. Just passing through. Long journey, the woman commented, especially for a lady. She gave Fiona an appraising look, noting her travel-worn appearance and the fading bruise on her cheek. Something like understanding passed across her face. Well, you're welcome to rest here as long as you need. No questions asked. Fiona smiled gratefully. Thank you. They ate hungrily, the hot food reviving their spirits after the long night on the trail. Isaac insisted Fiona take a room at the small hotel adjacent to the cafe to rest while the wheel was being repaired. Too exhausted to argue, she accepted, though she made him promise to wake her the moment the wagon was ready. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a basin of fresh water on the washstand. Fiona washed the dust from her face and hands, then lay down, intending only to close her eyes for a moment. She was asleep almost instantly. She dreamed of Victor, his face contorted with rage as he stood over her with raised fists. But in the dream, someone stepped between them, Isaac, solid and unafraid, shielding her from harm. The dream shifted, and suddenly she was standing in a small bookshop filled with sunlight, arranging volumes on polished wooden shelves while Isaac watched her with warm eyes. A soft knock woke her. Disoriented, she sat up quickly, momentary panic gripping her until she remembered where she was. Yes, it's me, Isaac's voice came through the door. Wheels fixed. We can leave whenever you're ready. Fiona glanced out the window, surprised to see the sun high in the sky. She'd slept for hours. I'll be right there, she called, hastily smoothing her hair and straightening her borrowed dress. When she opened the door, she found Isaac looking refreshed as well. He'd clearly taken the opportunity to clean up, his face freshly shaved and his clothes less travel-stained. You look better, she observed with a small smile. So do you, he replied, his eyes lingering on her face in a way that made her heart beat faster. Sleep well. Better than I have in years, she admitted. It was true despite the circumstances. She felt strangely at peace, as if a great burden had been lifted from her shoulders. They walked to the blacksmith shop where their wagon waited, the repaired wheel gleaming with new metal reinforcements. The horses had been fed and watered, and fresh supplies loaded in the back provisions Fiona hadn't remembered purchasing. I took the liberty of restocking while you slept, Isaac explained, noting her confused expression. We've still got a few days' journey ahead of us. Thank you, she said, touched by his thoughtfulness. What do I owe you for my share? Isaac shook his head firmly. Nothing. Consider it my contribution to your fresh start. Before she could protest, a commotion near the town's western entrance caught their attention. A rider was galloping into Miller's Crossing, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up at the sheriff's office across the street, shouting for attention. Sheriff, got trouble coming. 2 men just robbed the stage at Granite Pass, shot the driver and a passenger. They're headed this way. A cold fist of dread clenched in Fiona's stomach. Victor, she whispered. Isaac's expression hardened as he helped her quickly into the wagon. We need to leave. Now. They set off immediately, heading east out of town while the commotion behind them grew. Isaac pushed the horses harder than before, the newly repaired wheel handling the pace with ease. Fiona kept looking back, expecting to see Victor and Reeves appear at any moment. "The sheriff will be organizing a posse," Isaac said, trying to reassure her. "They won't be concerned with us." "Unless Victor tells them I'm his wife who stole his money," Fiona countered. "They might believe him." Isaac's jaw tightened. "Then we stay ahead of them all. Seattle's still a few days' journey, but once we're there, you can file for divorce." No judge would side with a man wanted for robbery and murder. The trail widened as they continued east, allowing for greater speed. They pushed on through the afternoon, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Miller's Crossing. By evening, they'd reached a broad river valley where the trail ran alongside a swift-flowing stream. "We'll have to cross eventually," Isaac observed, studying the landscape ahead. "River's too high to ford here, but there should be a bridge a few miles downstream." As they rounded a bend in the trail, the bridge came into view, a sturdy wooden structure spanning the river where it narrowed between rocky banks. But halfway across the bridge stood two mounted figures, unmistakable even at this distance. "How did they get ahead of us?" Fiona gasped, clutching Isaac's arm. "Must have known another route," Isaac replied grimly, pulling the wagon to a halt. "Or someone in Miller's Crossing told them which way we went." Victor raised his arm in a mocking wave from the bridge, clearly aware they'd been spotted. Beside him, Reeves sat with a rifle resting across his saddle, ready for use. "What do we do?" Fiona whispered, panic rising in her throat. Isaac studied the terrain quickly, assessing their options. "River's too high to ford here, and going back means running into whatever posse the sheriff has organized." He pointed to a narrow trail branching off to the north. "That looks like it leads up into the hills. Might be a way around." Without waiting for Victor to make a move, Isaac turned the team onto the side trail, urging them up the steep incline. Behind them, Fiona could hear Victor shouting, his words lost in the distance but the anger in his voice unmistakable. "They'll follow," she said, gripping the seat as the wagon lurched over the rough ground. "Let them," Isaac replied with quiet determination. "We've got a head start, and they can't bring their horses up as fast as they might like with that rifle Reeves is carrying." The trail grew steeper and narrower as they climbed, winding through dense pine forest that would make pursuit on horseback difficult. The wagon creaked and groaned with the strain, but the new wheel held firm. After an hour of grueling ascent, they reached a small plateau where the trail leveled briefly before continuing upward. "We need to rest the horses," Isaac said, pulling to a stop in a small clearing sheltered by massive pines. "Just for a few minutes." While the horses recovered their breath, Isaac quickly checked the wagon for any damage from the difficult climb. Fiona kept watch on the trail below, straining to see any sign of pursuit. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to movement among the trees far below. "Two riders." Isaac joined her, his expression grim as he confirmed her sighting. "They're persistent, I'll give them that, but they're still a good way behind us." "What if this trail doesn't go anywhere?" Fiona asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as they climbed higher into unfamiliar territory. "All trails lead somewhere," Isaac replied with more confidence than he probably felt. "And if this one doesn't suit us, we'll make our own way." They continued upward as the afternoon waned, the forest gradually thinning as they gained elevation. The trail became increasingly primitive, in some places little more than a game path that the wagon barely fit through. As sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, they emerged from the tree line into an alpine meadow ringed by rocky outcroppings. "Look," Isaac said, pointing ahead where the trail descended again on the far side of the meadow. There's our way down to the valley on the other side. Relief flooded through Fiona until she noticed his frown. What's wrong? We'll be exposed crossing this meadow, he explained, scanning the open ground critically. No cover if they catch up to us here. Could we wait until dark? She suggested. Isaac shook his head. Too dangerous to navigate that descent in the dark. And they'd likely catch up to us while we waited. He made a quick decision. We'll have to risk it. Stay low in the wagon. They set off across the meadow, the wagon moving as fast as the tired horses could manage over the uneven ground. Fiona kept glancing back nervously, expecting to see Victor and Reeves emerge from the trees at any moment. They were halfway across when her fears were realized. There they are, she said, her voice tight with fear as two riders appeared at the forest edge behind them. Almost immediately, a rifle shot cracked through the evening air, the bullet whistling past the wagon to thud into the ground ahead of them. The horses, already nervous, bucked in their harnesses at the sound. Get down, Isaac ordered, pushing Fiona below the wagon sideboards as another shot rang out. This one splintered wood at the back of the wagon, too close for comfort. Isaac cracked the reins, urging the team to greater speed despite their exhaustion. The wagon bounced violently over the rough meadow, heading for the descending trail on the far side. More shots followed, but the increasing distance and the moving target made accuracy difficult. They reached the far tree line as dusk was settling, the trail ahead plunging steeply downward into shadow. Isaac paused just long enough to check the horses and ensure the wagon was sound before continuing. The descent was nerve-wracking, the trail switching back and forth down the mountainside in sharp hairpin turns that tested Isaac's skill with the team. Night had fully fallen by the time they reached the valley floor, the moon not yet risen to light their way. Isaac guided the exhausted horses to a small copse of trees near a creek, concealing the wagon as best he could among the shadows. "We can't go further tonight," he said, his voice ragged with fatigue. "Horses are done in, and that trail down was treacherous enough in twilight. Would be suicide in full dark." "Will they follow us down in the dark?" Fiona asked, helping him unhitch the team with hands that trembled from tension and exhaustion. Isaac shook his head. "Not if they've got any sense. That descent would kill them and their horses both without daylight." He glanced up at the mountainside they just traversed. "But they'll be coming at first light, count on it." They made a cold camp, not daring to light a fire that might be spotted from above. They ate a sparse meal of jerky and dried fruit, washing it down with water from the creek. Despite her exhaustion, Fiona found sleep elusive, every sound in the darkness making her start with fear. "Try to rest," Isaac urged, settling himself against a tree trunk where he could watch both the creek and the trail down from the mountain. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," she protested. "I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn," he promised, though they both knew he wouldn't. Fiona wrapped herself in a blanket and lay down near the wagon, but despite her body's desperate need for rest, her mind continued to race. The events of the past few days played through her thoughts in a continuous loop: her escape from Republic, the river crossing, the abandoned mining camp, and now this desperate flight through the mountains. And through it all, Isaac's steadfast presence, his unwavering protection and support. She had known him for less than a week, yet already she trusted him with her life. More than that, she realized with a start of surprise, she was coming to care for him deeply. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After Victor, she had sworn never to let another man have such power over her heart. Yet here she was, falling for a wagon driver who had taken an enormous risk to help a woman he barely knew. "Isaac," she said softly, not sure if he was still awake. "HM." His response was immediate, proving he hadn't succumbed to sleep. Why did you really help me? That day in Republic. There was a long pause before he answered. Because you needed help, and because something in your eyes reminded me of what's important. What do you mean? She could hear him shift position in the darkness. After Caroline died, I stopped caring about much of anything, just moved from job to job, place to place, existing, not living. His voice grew softer. When I saw you behind that Mercantile, looking so afraid but so determined, it woke something in me that had been sleeping a long time. Fiona felt tears pricking at her eyes, touched beyond words by his honest confession. I'm glad you stopped, she whispered. So am I, he replied simply. They fell silent after that, the night sounds of the forest surrounding them, the soft gurgle of the creek, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Despite her anxiety, Fiona eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. She woke to the first pale light of dawn filtering through the trees and the sound of Isaac moving quietly around their camp, preparing to depart. She sat up quickly, embarrassed to have slept through the night when she'd intended to take a watch. You should have woken me, she chided, rising stiffly from her makeshift bed. Isaac glanced up from where he was checking the horses. You needed the rest. He looked tired but alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. We need to move soon. I've been watching the trail from the mountain. No sign of them yet, but they'll be coming. They hitched the team and packed their meager camp with practiced efficiency, working together as if they'd been traveling companions for years rather than days. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, they were already moving, following the valley floor northward. Where does this valley lead? Fiona asked, studying the unfamiliar landscape. If I've got my bearings right, it should eventually connect with the Snoqualmie Pass Trail, Isaac replied. From there, it's a straight shot to Seattle. How long, he considered, measuring distances in his mind. 2 days if we push hard. Maybe 3. They traveled steadily through the morning, the valley gradually widening as smaller streams joined the creek they were following. By midday, it had become a proper river and the forest had thinned enough to allow them to see some distance ahead. There, Isaac said suddenly, pointing to a plume of dust far down the valley. Riders, at least 3, maybe more. Fiona's heart sank. Victor, can't tell from here. Could be. Could also be a patrol from one of the settlements. He frowned, weighing their options. Either way, we should avoid them until we know for sure. They turned the wagon toward a stand of cottonwoods near the river, hoping to conceal themselves until the riders passed. As they drew closer to the trees, however, Isaac suddenly pulled the team to a halt, his posture alert. What is it? Fiona asked, alarmed by his sudden tension. Someone's there, he murmured, his hand moving to his revolver. In the trees. Before they could retreat, a figure emerged from the cottonwoods, a man in a weathered buckskin jacket, rifle held casually but ready. Fiona felt a surge of relief as she recognized him. Walker, she exclaimed. The older man's face broke into a surprised smile as he lowered his rifle. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to run into you two again. His eyes darted to the dust cloud in the distance. Though it seems trouble's still following you. Not sure who those riders are, Isaac explained, equally relieved to see their friend. Thought it best to lay low until they pass. Walker nodded. Smart. There's a hidden draw just beyond these trees. Good place to conceal a wagon. He glanced at the approaching riders again. Come on. We can catch up once you're safely out of sight. They followed Walker through the cottonwoods to a narrow ravine that cut back into the valley wall, invisible from the main valley floor. The space was just large enough for the wagon and horses, screened by thick brush and overhanging rock. Perfect hiding spot, Isaac commented as they secured the team. How did you know about it? Used to trap these valleys years ago, Walker explained. Know every hidey hole and game trail for 50 miles. He settled on a fallen log, rifle across his knees. Now, want to tell me why you're in this valley instead of on the main trail to Seattle? Isaac quickly related their encounter at the bridge and subsequent flight through the mountains, while Fiona kept watch at the entrance to their hiding place. Walker listened without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. Your husband's escalating, he observed when Isaac finished. Robbing stages, shooting innocent folks, man's desperate. He was always violent, Fiona said quietly, joining them, but this is different. It's like he's lost all restraint. Men like that are most dangerous when they're cornered, Walker agreed. And right now he's facing a murder charge if he's caught. That makes him unpredictable. He turned to Isaac. You were right to head for Snoqualmie Pass. It's your best route to Seattle from here. What about you? Isaac asked. Did you ever catch up with them to recover what they stole? A brief smile crossed Walker's face. Let's just say I retrieved my property yesterday, along with some interesting information. He lowered his voice, though there was no one else to hear. Those riders out there, they're a posse from Miller's Crossing, sheriff and 5 deputies hunting for your husband and Reeves. Hope surged through Fiona. Then they're not looking for us. Not specifically, Walker confirmed. Though they know about you two from descriptions in town. Sheriff seemed to think you were victims rather than accomplices, based on what folks in Miller's Crossing told him about how you behaved there. That's something, at least, Isaac said, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Still, best if we avoid them. Last thing we need is to get caught up in a manhunt, even if we're not the targets. Walker nodded in agreement. I'll go speak with them, let them know Prescott and Reeves were headed down from the mountain as of this morning. That should point them in the right direction without mentioning your presence. He rose, checking his rifle before returning it to its scabbard. You two stay put until they're well past, then continue north. There's a trapper's cabin about 10 miles up this valley where you can rest safely tonight. You're not coming with us? Fiona asked, surprising herself with her disappointment. Walker shook his head. Got business elsewhere, but if all goes well, I might see you in Seattle before too long. He tipped his hat to Fiona with a gentle smile. Take care of each other. With that, he slipped out of their hiding place, moving through the trees with the silent grace of a man who'd spent his life in the wilderness. They watched as he approached the posse on the valley floor, now close enough to see the glint of a sheriff's badge on the lead rider. He's an interesting man, Fiona observed. I wonder what his story really is. Some people prefer to keep their histories to themselves, Isaac replied. Out here, a man's past is his own business unless he chooses to share it. They watched from concealment as Walker conversed with the sheriff, occasionally pointing back toward the mountain trail they'd descended. After several minutes, the posse continued southward at an increased pace, clearly eager to catch up with their quarry. Walker watched them go, then raised his hand in a brief salute toward the hidden draw before mounting his pony and heading in the opposite direction. Looks like we're clear, Isaac said as Walker disappeared from view. But we'll give the posse a good head start before we continue. They used the forced delay to rest the horses and check the wagon thoroughly. The descent from the mountain had taken its toll on the vehicle, loosening several bolts and wearing the new wheel where it hadn't been perfectly aligned. Isaac made what repairs he could with their limited tools. It'll hold to Seattle, he assured Fiona as he tightened the last bolt, though I wouldn't want to take it much further without proper maintenance. By mid-afternoon, they judged it safe to continue their journey. Following Walker's directions, they traveled north through the valley, the terrain growing easier as they progressed. The river beside them widened and deepened, its current slowing as the valley floor leveled. As evening approached, they spotted the trapper's cabin. Walker had mentioned a small but sturdy structure built of logs and chinked with clay, nestled against the valley wall where a small tributary joined the main river. A stone chimney promised the comfort of a real fire, something they hadn't dared risk since leaving Miller's Crossing. The cabin was dusty but sound, clearly unused for some months, but maintained well enough to provide genuine shelter. A cache of dry firewood was stacked against one wall, and basic supplies, salt, coffee, beans, were stored in tight-lidded tins to protect them from rodents. Walker must have used this place himself, Isaac observed as he built a fire in the small stone hearth. It's better stocked than most abandoned cabins would be. Fiona explored the single room, finding a narrow cot built into one wall, a crude table and 2 chairs, and various trapping implements hanging from pegs. She swept the worst of the dust out the door, then set about preparing a simple meal from their supplies and what they found in the cabin. As darkness fell, they sat before the fire, savoring hot food and the luxury of solid walls around them for the first time in days. The immediate danger seemed to have passed, at least temporarily, allowing them both to relax enough to truly rest. "What will you do when we reach Seattle?" Isaac asked, breaking a comfortable silence that had stretched between them. Fiona considered the question, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "Find my cousin first if she's still there. Look for work. Start saving for that bookshop, perhaps." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing in her mind. "What about you? Will you continue your wagon routes once you've delivered me safely?" Isaac stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "For years the road was all I wanted or needed. Now—" his eyes lifted to meet hers. "Now I'm not so sure." The weight of unspoken feelings hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to voice what had been growing since that first meeting behind the Mercantile in Republic. Fiona felt her heart quicken as Isaac's gaze held hers, the firelight casting warm shadows across his face. "Fiona," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I know we haven't known each other long, and your life has been upside down these past days. But a sound outside the cabin interrupted him, the unmistakable crack of a twig breaking under a heavy boot. They both froze, the moment shattered by sudden fear. Isaac was on his feet instantly, revolver drawn as he moved to the cabin's single window, carefully keeping to the side to avoid being silhouetted against the firelight. "See anything?" Fiona whispered, her own hand moving to the small derringer she'd found in the trading post's medical kit and had kept hidden in her pocket. Isaac shook his head, his expression tense as he scanned the darkness outside. Too dark. The door burst open with sudden violence, kicked inward with enough force to tear one of the leather hinges. Victor Prescott filled the doorway, a shotgun leveled at Isaac, his face twisted into a triumphant snarl. "Found you at last," he growled, his eyes flickering between Isaac and Fiona. "Drop the gun, wagon man, or I'll blow a hole through you big enough to drive your team through." Isaac hesitated, clearly calculating whether he could fire before Victor pulled the trigger. The standoff lasted only seconds before he reluctantly lowered his revolver to the floor. "Kick it away," Victor ordered, stepping further into the cabin. As Isaac complied, Victor's gaze shifted to Fiona, his eyes burning with malice. "Hello, wife. Been quite a chase you've led me on." Fiona stood straight, refusing to cower despite the fear churning inside her. "I'm not your wife anymore, Victor. Not in any way that matters." Victor laughed, the sound harsh in the small cabin. "Law says different, sweetheart, and you've got something that belongs to me." His free hand patted the pocket of his dirt-stained coat. "Besides, I've got a nice reward now for bringing in your boyfriend here. Turns out he's wanted in Oregon for questioning about a stage robbery last year." Isaac's expression remained calm, though his eyes flashed with anger. "That's a lie." "Maybe," Victor shrugged, seeming to enjoy his power over them. "But the sheriff back in Miller's Crossing was mighty interested when I suggested it might be worth checking, especially after that stage got robbed on the pass." His grin widened. "Amazing how quick folks believe the worst when there's violence about." "Where's your friend Reeves?" Isaac asked, clearly trying to gauge the full extent of the threat. "Jacob had a disagreement with me about how to handle things," Victor replied vaguely. "He won't be joining us." Something in his tone suggested the disagreement had ended badly for the bounty hunter. Victor gestured with the shotgun. "Now, Fiona, be a good wife and fetch that money you stole from me. Then we'll discuss how you're going to make up for all the trouble you've caused." "It wasn't your money," Fiona replied, her hand inching closer to her pocket where the derringer waited. "I earned it washing and mending for the miners. You stole it from me every week." Victor's face darkened with anger. "Everything you earn is mine by right. Now get the money before I lose my patience." Fiona's fingers closed around the derringer in her pocket. She glanced at Isaac, seeing the subtle shake of his head, warning her against rash action. Victor was too far away, the shotgun too deadly at this range. "The money's in my bag," she said, moving slowly toward where her small cloth bag sat beside the cot. "I'll get it." Victor watched her closely, the shotgun never wavering from its aim at Isaac's chest. As Fiona reached for her bag, a shadow passed across the window, brief but distinct enough to catch Victor's attention. His head turned slightly, distracted for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Isaac moved with explosive speed, diving toward Victor as the larger man swung the shotgun back in his direction. The weapon discharged with a deafening roar in the confined space, the shot going wide as Isaac crashed into Victor's legs. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for control of the shotgun. Fiona pulled the derringer from her pocket, but the men were rolling on the floor, making it impossible to fire without risking Isaac. She circled desperately, looking for an opening when another figure appeared in the doorway, Walker, rifle in hand, his expression grim as he assessed the chaotic scene. "Move aside, Fiona," he ordered calmly. She complied instantly, and Walker stepped into the cabin, moving with surprising speed for a man his age. As Victor gained momentary advantage, pinning Isaac beneath his greater weight, Walker brought the butt of his rifle down hard on Victor's head. The blow wasn't enough to render him unconscious, but stunned him sufficiently for Isaac to scramble free. Victor roared with rage, lunging to his feet despite the blow, but now faced both Isaac and Walker, with Fiona still holding the derringer. He paused, breathing heavily, blood trickling from a gash on his temple where Walker's rifle had struck. "It's over, Prescott," Walker said, his rifle now pointed steadily at Victor's chest. "You're outnumbered and the sheriff's posse is less than an hour behind me." "She's my wife," Victor snarled, his gaze fixed on Fiona with such hatred that she took an involuntary step back. "Mine by law, and I'll see her dead before I let her go." With shocking suddenness, he lunged toward Fiona, a knife appearing in his hand from a hidden sheath. Isaac shouted a warning, but Walker was already moving. His rifle cracked once, the sound thunderous in the small cabin. Victor staggered, the knife falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. He looked down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest, then crumpled to the floor. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Isaac was at Fiona's side, gently taking the derringer from her trembling hand and guiding her to a chair. Walker knelt beside Victor, checking for signs of life, though the stillness of the big man's body told its own story. "He's gone," Walker confirmed, rising heavily to his feet. His eyes met Fiona's, filled with regret but no remorse. "I'm sorry you had to see that, madam. Some men just don't leave any choice." Fiona nodded numbly, the reality of Victor's death not yet fully registering. For 5 years he had been the center of her existence, his moods and whims dictating every aspect of her life. Now he was gone, just like that, and she was free. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. "We wait for the sheriff," Walker replied. "I passed the posse about 5 miles back, told them I'd spotted Prescott heading this way. They should be here soon." He glanced at Victor's body dispassionately. "Given what he's done, the stage robbery, killing the driver and passenger, they won't question this too closely. Self-defense is clear enough." Isaac squeezed Fiona's hand reassuringly. "It's over," he said softly. "Really over this time." As Walker had predicted, the sheriff and his deputies arrived less than an hour later, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Harkins with decades of frontier law enforcement written in the lines of his face, listened to their account without interruption, occasionally nodding as details matched information he already possessed. "Reeves is dead too," he informed them when they finished. "Found him back up the trail with a knife wound to the ribs. Seems Prescott didn't want to share whatever he was after." He glanced at the money pouch Fiona had retrieved from her bag. "That what all this was about? Doesn't seem worth 2 lives." "It wasn't just about the money," Fiona said quietly. "It was about control. Victor couldn't stand the thought of me escaping him." Sheriff Harkins studied her thoughtfully, noting the fading bruise on her face and drawing his own conclusions. "Well, madam, I don't see anything here but justified self-defense. My deputies will take care of the body. As for you folks," he looked at Isaac and Walker, "I'd suggest continuing to Seattle without delay, less complications that way." They spent a restless night in the cabin, despite the sheriff's assurances. The presence of Victor's body, now wrapped in a blanket and placed outside under the watchful eye of a deputy, casting a pall over what should have been a moment of relief. At dawn, they prepared to depart, eager to leave the scene of the previous night's violence behind. Walker surprised them by announcing he would accompany them to Seattle. "Might as well," he said when Isaac questioned him. "Got business there myself, and 3 travelers are safer than 2, even with Prescott and Reeves gone." The journey to Snoqualmie Pass took them through increasingly settled country, small farms and logging camps appearing with greater frequency as they approached the main route to Seattle. They encountered other travelers' freight wagons, riders, and even a stagecoach that passed them with a cloud of dust, and the driver's cheerful wave. With each mile, Fiona felt the weight of her past lifting further, allowing her to think more clearly about the future. Her conversations with Isaac grew increasingly open and warm, the connection between them strengthening despite, or perhaps, because of all they had endured together. Walker observed their growing closeness with quiet approval, occasionally sharing stories of his own long life on the frontier that had them laughing despite their recent ordeal. 2 days later, they crested the final ridge and saw Seattle spread before them, a bustling port city nestled between Puget Sound and Lake Washington, its streets and wharves teeming with activity. Ships filled the harbor, their masts forming a forest of timber against the blue waters of the Sound. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the sound of construction echoed across the valley as new buildings rose to accommodate the city's rapid growth. "There it is," Isaac said, pulling the team to a halt so they could take in the view. "Journey's End." Fiona felt a curious mixture of emotions as she gazed at the city that would be her new home: excitement, apprehension, and a touch of sadness that their journey together was concluding. She glanced at Isaac, finding him already watching her, something unspoken in his eyes. "What will you do now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than his immediate plans. Before he could answer, Walker cleared his throat. "Think I'll ride ahead," he announced, clearly sensing the moment needed privacy. "Got some arrangements to make in town. I'll meet you at the Occidental Hotel this evening." With a tip of his hat, he nudged his pony forward, soon disappearing down the trail toward the city. Alone at last, Isaac turned fully toward Fiona, taking both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said, his voice low and earnest. "For years, I've had no home but the road, no purpose beyond the next delivery. That changed the moment I met you behind that Mercantile." Fiona's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's fast. I know you've just escaped one marriage and probably never want to think about another. But I need you to know that these past days with you have meant more to me than all the years before." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Fiona Prescott. And if you'll give me time to prove it, I want to build a life with you, that bookshop you dream of. Perhaps on a piece of land with good water and timber, where we could put down roots together." Tears filled Fiona's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. In less than a week, this man had shown her more kindness, respect, and genuine affection than she'd experienced in years. Against all odds, in the midst of danger and flight, she had found something precious and rare. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both frightening and absolutely right. "I don't need time to know that, but I do need time before another marriage. Can you understand that?" Isaac's smile was warm with understanding. "Of course. We have all the time in the world now. No one chasing us, no need to rush any decision." He squeezed her hands gently. "I just wanted you to know where I stand before we reach Seattle and life gets complicated again." Fiona leaned forward impulsively, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: her gratitude, her affection, her hope for their future together. When they parted, both were smiling, the tension of their journey finally melting away in the promise of what lay ahead. "Shall we?" Isaac asked, gesturing toward the city below. Fiona nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yes, let's go home." They found Fiona's cousin, Frances, working as she'd hoped at one of Seattle's new department stores. The reunion was joyful and tearful, Frances welcoming her long-lost cousin with open arms, and insisting that Fiona stay with her in the small but comfortable apartment she rented near the store. Isaac took lodgings nearby, visiting daily as they began to explore the possibilities Seattle offered for their future. Walker remained in the city longer than any of them expected, his business apparently more extensive than he'd let on. It was through him that they learned of an opportunity that would change everything: a bookstore up for sale in a growing neighborhood, its elderly owner eager to retire. The store came with living quarters above, modest but well-maintained, and a reputation for quality that stretched back to Seattle's earliest days as a proper city. "It's perfect," Fiona breathed as they toured the shop, her fingers trailing lovingly over the shelves of carefully curated volumes. "But I could never afford it, not yet." "Perhaps not alone," Isaac suggested, his eyes alight with possibility, "but together." The plan came together quickly after that. Isaac sold his wagon and team for a good price to a freight company expanding its operations. Combined with Fiona's savings and a lone Walker mysteriously arranged through a banker friend, they had enough to purchase the bookstore. They renamed it New Chapter Books, a name that represented fresh beginnings in more ways than one. Walker surprised them the day before the sale was finalized by revealing the true extent of his business in Seattle. He owned considerable property in the growing city. Investments made decades earlier, when land was cheap and Seattle merely a promising frontier outpost. "Been meaning to settle down for years," he admitted over dinner at the Occidental Hotel. "Just needed the right incentive. Watching you two find each other, build something new despite everything. Well, it reminded an old man what's important." 6 months after their arrival in Seattle, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold and red in the city parks, Fiona and Isaac were married in a simple ceremony at the small church near their bookstore. Francis stood as Fiona's witness, while Walker, now firmly established as a respected Seattle businessman, stood for Isaac. The bookstore closed early that day, a hand-painted sign in the window announcing "Closed for wedding proprietors back tomorrow." They honeymooned briefly at a small cabin Walker owned on Puget Sound, returning to find that their friends had arranged to surprise the installation of a proper tea service area in one corner of the bookstore, complete with comfortable chairs and small tables, making Fiona's dream of a place for reading and conversation a reality. The bookstore thrived under their joint care, becoming a gathering place for Seattle's growing community of readers and thinkers. Isaac discovered a talent for finding rare volumes that collectors sought, while Fiona's warm hospitality and knowledge of literature drew regular customers who came as much for the conversation as for the books. In the spring of their second year in Seattle, Fiona gave birth to a son they named William, after Isaac's father. Walker, now firmly established in their lives as a beloved uncle figure, brought the infant a tiny rocking chair he'd carved himself, promising to teach the boy everything he knew about the wilderness when he was old enough. One evening, as Seattle's lights twinkled beyond their windows and William slept peacefully in his cradle, Isaac found Fiona standing at the bookstore window, gazing thoughtfully at the busy street outside. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Fiona leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his presence. "I was just thinking about Republic, believe it or not, about that day behind the Mercantile. Dark thoughts?" he asked gently, knowing how far she'd come in healing from those years, but aware that the memories still surfaced occasionally. She shook her head, turning in his arms to face him. "Not dark at all. I was thinking how strange life is, how one moment, one decision can change everything." Her eyes, clear and untroubled, met his. "If you hadn't stopped that day, if you hadn't asked how far I needed to go." "But I did stop," he reminded her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And here we are." "Here we are," she echoed with a smile. "Exactly where we're meant to be." Outside, Seattle continued its evening bustle, a city growing and changing just as they had. Inside their bookstore, their home, Fiona and Isaac Donovan held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the life they continued to build, one page at a time. The years passed, and new chapter books became a Seattle institution. William grew into a thoughtful boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's love of literature. He was joined by a sister, Caroline, named for Isaac's first wife in a gesture of healing that acknowledged the past while embracing the future. Walker remained a constant in their lives, though he traveled frequently, his business interests extending up and down the coast. Each return brought gifts for the children, and new stories of adventure that had Isaac and Fiona exchanging knowing glances over their children's enraptured faces. "You ever miss it?" Fiona asked Isaac one evening as they closed the shop, the day's accounts balanced and the books neatly shelved for tomorrow's customers. The road, I mean, the freedom of it. Isaac considered the question seriously, as he did all her questions. Sometimes, he admitted. On spring mornings when the air feels just right for traveling, or when a customer brings news of some distant place I haven't seen. He drew her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been that first day in Republic. But then I look at you, at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know I'm exactly where I need to be. This is the freedom that matters, to love and be loved, to build something lasting. Fiona rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Isaac Donovan. And I love you, Fiona Donovan, he replied, the name still bringing a smile to both their faces even after all these years. How far we've come from that Mercantile to here. All the way home, she whispered. That's how far we needed to go. Outside their window, Seattle continued to grow and change, but within the walls of new chapter books, Fiona and Isaac had found something timeless, a love born in desperate circumstances that had flourished into a life neither could have imagined on that fateful day when a frightened woman hid behind a mercantile and a kind-hearted wagon driver asked, "How far do you need to go?"